At lunch, my daughter whispered to me, "You are a miserable woman with no future. Dad's new wife is much more elegant." I stayed quiet. A week later, when she saw my new boyfriend's Porsche parked in front of the house, my phone rang 53 times. I only replied with, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment what city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." My name is Claire, and I'm 62 years old. I've been living alone for 5 years in this small 2-bedroom house after a divorce that left me with practically nothing. Not that I'm complaining, I've learned to live on the basics, but I never thought my own daughter would be the one to constantly remind me of my new reality. It was a Sunday afternoon when Valerie called me for lunch. My daughter is 35 years old, married to a successful lawyer. She lives in a $500,000 house in the best neighborhood in the city. When she invited me, I thought maybe she wanted to spend time with me, that she missed her mother. How naive I was. I arrived at the restaurant she chose, one of those elegant places where a salad costs $18. I put on my best dress, the navy blue one I bought at a thrift store, but that still looks decent. Valerie was already seated when I arrived, checking her phone with that expression of impatience I knew entirely too well. "You're late," she told me without looking up. I checked my watch. It was 12:05, 5 minutes late. "The bus was a little delayed," I muttered as I sat across from her. I haven't owned a car since the divorce. Robert kept everything, including the Honda that I had helped pay off for 15 years. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation was strictly superficial. She told me about her work at the PR firm, about the European vacation she was planning with her husband. I nodded, asked the right questions, smiled when it was appropriate. I've always been good at pretending everything is fine. Then came the moment that would change everything. "Mom," she said while cutting into her $42 lobster salad, "I need to ask you something." Her tone shifted, becoming more serious, almost professional. "Have you thought about what you're going to do with your life?" "What do you mean?" "I mean your situation. Living in that little house, working part-time at the flower shop, taking the bus everywhere." Her eyes studied me with a mixture of pity and something else I couldn't immediately identify. "It's a little embarrassing." I felt like I had been punched in the gut, but I kept my composure. "Valerie, I'm fine. It's true that things have been hard, but I manage." She sighed like she was talking to a child who just didn't get it. "Mom, last weekend was Marcy's birthday. Remember her, my friend from college? She asked about you, wanted to know how you were doing after the divorce." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her the truth, that Dad married Elaine and that he's very happy. Elaine is so elegant, so sophisticated. She's 38, you know, and she's a doctor. They live in that beautiful $800,000 house overlooking the lake." Valerie paused, chewing slowly. "Marcy asked me what had become of you, and honestly, I didn't know what to say." The fork trembled slightly in my hand. "You could have said that I'm fine, that I'm independent." A laugh entirely devoid of humor escaped my daughter's lips. "Independent? Mom, please. You work 20 hours a week for $12 an hour at a flower shop. You live in a house that looks like it's going to fall down. You have no car. You don't go out. You have no social life." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You are a miserable woman with no future." The words fell between us like stones dropped into a quiet pond. The ripples spread, touching every corner of my being. Valerie went right back to eating as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just destroyed her mother with a single sentence. "Elaine, on the other hand," she kept going, "is everything a woman should be. She's successful, beautiful, she has presence. When she goes to events with Dad, people notice her. She dresses well, she speaks intelligently about important topics. She's the kind of woman who inspires respect." I just sat there, frozen, feeling every single word sink in like a knife twisting deeper. My own daughter, the little girl I had carried in my womb for 9 months, who I had stayed awake with when she had a fever, who I had supported through every major decision of her life, was comparing me to her father's new wife and finding me completely inferior. "It's not that I want to hurt you," she added in a tone that pretended to be gentle, but just sounded condescending. "But I think it's important that you're realistic about your situation. You're not young anymore. You don't have a career. You don't have money. Maybe you should consider moving into one of those senior living apartments. There are some really nice ones, much more suited to your current lifestyle." The waiter came over to ask if we wanted dessert. Valerie ordered a $12 tiramisu. I shook my head, not because I wasn't hungry, but because I knew I wouldn't be able to swallow another bite. "I'll obviously pay the bill," Valerie said when the waiter left. That word obviously rang in my ears like a funeral bell. I sat there watching my daughter enjoy her dessert, chatting now about her plans to redecorate her office, as if the last 20 minutes had never happened, as if she hadn't just reduced my entire existence to a series of failures and limitations. When we finished, and she paid the $115 check without blinking, we walked toward the exit. At the door, she gave me a quick, almost mechanical, hug. "Think about what I said, Mom. It's for your own good." I watched her walk away toward her silver BMW while I waited for the bus. I waited 45 minutes under the afternoon sun, replaying her words over and over in my head. "You are a miserable woman with no future." That night, sitting in my small living room, surrounded by the furniture I had managed to keep after the divorce, something began to stir inside me. It wasn't just pain I was feeling. It was something deeper, something more dangerous. It was the awakening of a woman who had been asleep for entirely too long. For the first time in 5 years, Claire Davis was starting to wonder if she actually knew her own worth. The days following that lunch were strange. I couldn't get Valerie's words out of my head, but for the first time, instead of just hurting me, they started to bother me. It bothered me that my own daughter saw me as a failure. It bothered me even more to realize that maybe I had started seeing myself that way too. On Tuesday morning, while I was arranging some white carnations at the flower shop, I got a call from my sister Rose. She lives in Phoenix, and we talk about once a month, usually about trivial things. But this time, she had something different to tell me. "Claire, you are not going to believe what Valerie told me yesterday." Rose started without any preamble. I stopped holding a carnation halfway to the arrangement. "You talked to Valerie?" "She called me, says she's worried about you, that you're in a— how can I put this delicately? That you're in a really tough spot financially, that you can barely pay rent, and that sometimes you don't even have money for groceries." I felt the blood rush to my face. "You told her that?" "Of course not. I told her that as far as I knew, you were fine. But Claire, is it true? Are you having such serious problems?" I took a deep breath. "I'm fine, Rose. I have my job. I have my house. It's not a mansion, but it's mine. Technically, it wasn't mine. I rented it for $800 a month. But Rose didn't need to know all the details. Because if you need help, you know that I don't need help." I cut her off maybe a little more sharply than I intended. "What else did Valerie say?" There was an awkward pause. "Well, she also told me about Elaine Roberts' new wife. Says she's incredible, that she's a doctor, and they live really well. She asked me if I thought you felt jealous or resentful." "And what did you say?" "I told her it was none of her business to speculate about your feelings." Rose paused. "Claire, is there something you're not telling me?" After hanging up, I just stood there among the flowers, feeling a mix of humiliation and rage that I had never experienced before. My daughter hadn't just insulted me to my face. She was now calling my family to paint a picture of me as some pathetic woman who couldn't fend for herself. That afternoon, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years: go through all my divorce papers. I kept them in a cardboard box in the bedroom closet, along with other documents I had accumulated over the years. I don't know what I expected to find, but I felt I needed to understand exactly what I had lost and what I had gained when my 28-year marriage came to an end. What I found surprised me. I had forgotten a lot of things. For instance, that during the last 10 years of my marriage, I had worked full-time as an admin at an insurance company, making $45,000 a year. That money had gone straight into the joint account that Robert managed. I had also forgotten that when we bought the house where he now lives with Elaine, I had put down $15,000 from my mother's inheritance toward the down payment. But what shocked me the most was finding an envelope I didn't remember keeping. Inside was a letter from a lawyer dated 3 months after the divorce was finalized. The letter mentioned something about assets not considered in the division of property and referenced a plot of land on the outskirts of the city that I had inherited from my maternal grandmother 15 years ago. I sat on the edge of the bed, reading the letter over and over again. How was it possible that this land hadn't been included in the divorce Robert and his lawyer had been so meticulous? Or so I thought. They had listed every bank account, every piece of furniture, every asset we had acquired during the marriage. But apparently, this land had been left out because technically I had inherited it before the marriage, even though it had been in my name this whole time. The next day, I called the lawyer who had written a letter. His secretary informed me he had retired, but gave me the contact for his partner who had taken over his cases. It took me 2 days to work up the courage to make that call. "Mrs. Davis," the new lawyer said after reviewing my files over the phone. "Yes, you are indeed the owner of a 5-acre parcel in the Riverside sector." I didn't know. I mean, I knew, but I thought it had been lost in the divorce. No assets inherited prior to marriage generally remain with the original heir, unless they were specifically transferred or commingled with marital assets. In this case, the title has always been solely in your name. My heart started beating faster. And does that land have any value? Well, we would need to do a current appraisal, but the Riverside sector has seen considerable development in recent years. If you let me do some digging, I could give you an estimate in a few days. I hung up the phone with my hands shaking. I didn't know if it was from nerves or excitement. For 5 years, I had believed that Robert walked away with everything that I had come out of the marriage, with practically nothing. But maybe there was something he didn't know, something even I didn't remember having. That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept deeply. I dreamed I was standing on a wide green plot of land under an endless blue sky. In the dream, there was no one else but me. No voices telling me what to do, how to live, what I should be doing. Just me and the possibility of something different. On Friday morning, while I was sorting red roses for an anniversary arrangement, the flower shop phone rang. "Claire, it's Valerie. Do you have a minute?" Her voice sounded different, less confident than the Sunday before. "Of course. What do you need?" "Well, I talked to Aunt Rose and she mentioned you two spoke. I want to clear something up. I'm not trying to get you in trouble or make you look bad to the family. I'm just worried about you." Worried. Yes, as a daughter. It's natural for me to worry about my mother's well-being. Her tone was condescending, like she was explaining something obvious to a toddler. "And honestly, I think you need to consider making some changes in your life. You can't keep living like you're 25. Something inside me hardened. "Valerie, I am 62 years old, not 102. I don't need you to look after me like I'm some invalid." "I'm not saying that, but let's be realistic. You don't have the resources to maintain real independence. Maybe it would be better." "If what?" I interrupted, surprising myself with the sharp edge in my own voice. There was an awkward silence. "Maybe we should talk in person. You can come over for dinner on Sunday. Michael is going to be out of town for work, so we can talk quietly." When I hung up, I stared at the phone for several minutes. My daughter wanted another conversation, probably to continue her mission of convincing me I was a hopeless failure. But this time, I had something she didn't know I had. A lawyer's letter that might just change everything. On Monday morning, I got the call that would shift my entire world. The lawyer sounded excited, something I hadn't expected to hear from a man who probably handled these kinds of matters every single day. "Mrs. Davis, I have some very good news regarding your land," he told me, without beating around the bush. "I've done some research, and it turns out it's located in an area that has been rezoned for commercial development. The current estimated value is between $250,000 and $300,000. I dropped the phone. I literally had to crouch down to pick it up off the flower shop floor, and when I pressed it back to my ear, the lawyer was still talking. "And furthermore, there's a construction firm that has been buying up lots in that area. If you're interested in selling, they could make a very competitive offer. But before making any decisions, I'd recommend we visit the property together to do a more precise evaluation." After hanging up, I just stood there among the flowers, feeling like the world had suddenly changed color. $300,000. It was more money than I had ever had in my entire life. It was more than Robert had made in 5 years when we were married. But it was about more than just the money. It was the feeling of having options for the first time in a very long time. The lawyer and I agreed to meet on Wednesday afternoon to go see the land. I hadn't been out there in over 10 years since my grandmother died. I only remembered it as a patch of dirt with some trees and an old wire fence. On Wednesday, I arrived early at the meeting spot we had agreed upon, a little coffee shop near downtown. The lawyer had told me he was an older man with gray hair and that he'd be carrying a black briefcase. What I didn't expect was to sit at the wrong table and end up talking to a complete stranger. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Davis?" a man approaching my table asked me. He was tall, maybe around my age, with salt and pepper hair and blue eyes that looked strikingly familiar. "Yes, that's me," I replied, assuming he was the lawyer. "I can't believe it," he said, sitting across from me with a smile I suddenly recognized. "Claire Evans. Claire Davis." Now my heart really stopped. Jonathan Miller. I hadn't seen him in 42 years, but his smile was exactly the same as I remembered from when we were 20. "Jonathan," I murmured, feeling like I was looking at a ghost. "What are you doing here?" "I live here now. Moved 2 years ago, after I retired." He leaned forward, studying my face with that intensity I remembered so well. "You look amazing." I blushed like a teenager. "No, I don't look amazing. I look like a 62-year-old woman who has seen better days." "You look exactly like the Claire I knew in college," he insisted, maybe with a few laugh lines that make you look more interesting but essentially the same. Before I could respond, the actual lawyer arrived, a short, bald man who was clearly not Jonathan. The confusion was cleared up quickly. Jonathan had seen a woman sitting alone in the coffee shop and thought he recognized me. After 40 years, he had been right. "I have to go," I told Jonathan after introducing him to the lawyer. "I have a business meeting." "Business." His eyes lit up with genuine curiosity. "Are you a businesswoman?" "Not exactly," I said, not knowing how to explain the situation without sounding pathetic. "It's about a piece of land I inherited." "How interesting. Would you mind if I called you later? I'd love to catch up." I gave him my number without thinking much about it. Right then, my mind was entirely focused on the land and what it could mean for my future. The property was much more valuable than I had ever imagined. It was located on a strategic corner with direct access to a main highway and close to a new residential development. The lawyer confirmed that the construction company was highly interested and would likely make a formal offer within a week. That night, while I was eating canned tomato soup in my tiny kitchen, my phone rang. It was Jonathan. "I hope I'm not calling too late," he said. "I couldn't get our meeting this afternoon out of my head." "It's not late," I lied. I usually went to bed at 9, but I didn't want to sound like the older woman with no social life that Valerie claimed I was. "Claire, I have to ask you something, and I hope you don't mind me prying. How have you been all these years? Are you happy?" The question caught me totally off guard. No one had asked me if I was happy in years. "I've been fine," I finally said. "That's not an answer. Fine is what you tell the cashier at the grocery store when they ask how you're doing." Despite myself, I laughed. "You're right. The truth is, it's been a tough few years. I got divorced 5 years ago, and I'm still finding my way." "I'm sorry about the divorce. It's hard. Really hard." I didn't know why I was telling this to someone I hadn't seen in decades, but there was something in his voice that made me feel safe. My ex-husband remarried a 38-year-old doctor. "Ah, one of those," Jonathan said, with a tone that held no pity, just understanding. "Let me guess. He made you feel like you were invisible for years, and when he finally left, he convinced you it was because you just weren't enough." His words felt like a slap, but not out of pain, out of pure recognition. "How do you know that?" "Because my ex-wife did the exact same thing to me. She left me 8 years ago for her personal trainer, after 28 years. Told me she needed someone who understood her passion for life." He laughed, but not bitterly. "It took me years to realize that the problem wasn't that I wasn't enough. The problem was that she never really saw me." We talked for 2 hours that night. He told me about his career as a civil engineer, about the projects he had worked on, about his 2 kids who were now adults living out of state. I told him about Valerie, though I left out the most hurtful details of our recent conversation. "And what do you do for fun?" he asked toward the end of the call. Fun? The question sounded foreign to me. "I don't know. I read, watch TV, work in my little garden." "Claire, when was the last time you did something just because you wanted to do it?" Not because it was necessary or responsible or appropriate, but just because it made you happy. I couldn't answer right away because I honestly couldn't remember. "I'm going to make you a proposal," Jonathan continued. "This Saturday there's a farmer's market downtown. Afterward, we could walk through the park, maybe grab lunch somewhere nice. Nothing fancy, just two old friends catching up." "Jonathan, you don't have to decide right now. Just think about it. I'll call you tomorrow." After hanging up, I sat in my small living room, looking at the walls I had been staring at for 5 years. For the first time in a long time, I wondered how it would feel to step out of this house. Not because I had to go to work or the grocery store, but because I actually wanted to be somewhere else. I wondered how it would feel to have someone look at me not as a burden or a source of embarrassment, but simply as Claire. Not as Robert's failed ex-wife, not as Valerie's disappointing mother, but just as myself. That night I dreamed I was 20 again, and Jonathan and I were walking across the college campus, laughing at something he had said. In the dream, the future stretched out before us, full of endless possibilities. When I woke up for a split second, I didn't remember where I was. Then I saw my tiny bedroom, my clothes draped over the old chair, and reality came rushing back. But something had changed. For the first time in years, I actually wanted to get out of bed. I decided to go to the farmer's market with Jonathan, not because I was brave or because I was ready for a romance, but because I couldn't remember the last time someone had genuinely wanted to spend time with me without a hidden agenda. Saturday morning, I woke up early, nervous as a teenager getting ready for her first date. I tried on 3 different dresses before settling on a simple green one I had bought years ago but rarely wore. When I looked in the mirror, I surprised myself. I didn't look bad. Different from how I had looked for the last 5 years, sure, but not bad. Jonathan arrived to pick me up at exactly 10 o'clock, just as we agreed. He was driving a silver Porsche, elegant but not overly flashy. When I opened my front door, he smiled that exact same smile I remembered from college. "You look beautiful," he told me. And he said it in a way that made me actually believe him. The market was pulsing with life. Stalls of fresh fruit, organic vegetables, vibrant flowers, local crafts. Jonathan knew several of the vendors and introduced me as his college friend Claire, not as someone's ex-wife, not as someone's mother, just simply as Claire. "What do you like?" he asked me while we browsed an artisanal cheese stand. "I don't know," I admitted. "It's been so long since I've bought anything but the absolute basics that I forget what I actually like." "Then let's find out." He bought small samples of 6 different cheeses, a loaf of artisan bread, marinated olives, and a bottle of white wine. "We're having an impromptu picnic." We walked to the park 2 blocks from the market. Jonathan spread out a blanket that he apparently always kept in his trunk for occasions just like this. While we ate, he told me about his work as an engineer, about the bridges he had designed, about a water conservation project he had run in Arizona before moving here. "And what about you?" he asked. "Did you work outside the home when you were married?" "For the last 10 years, yeah, I was an admin at an insurance company." I didn't tell him that Robert had always minimized my work, telling me it was just a little job to keep me busy. "Did you enjoy it?" The question caught me off guard. I never really thought about whether I liked it or not. It was a job, it paid the bills. "That is a very sad way to spend 40 hours a week," Jonathan observed. "What would you have liked to do if you could have chosen anything?" "I don't know. When I was young, I wanted to study interior design, but my parents thought it wasn't practical. Then I got married and, well, priorities shifted." "Are you still interested in it?" "I guess so. I always notice spaces, how they're arranged, what makes them feel warm or cold." I stopped, surprised to find myself talking about this out loud. "But it's way too late to change careers now." "Who says it's too late?" Jonathan looked at me dead serious. "Claire, you're 62, not 92. You could live another 20 or 30 years. Do you really want to spend them feeling like it's too late for everything?" His words kept ringing in my head for the rest of the day. After the picnic, we walked through the park. Jonathan told me about the places he had lived, about the trips he took after his divorce, about the books he was reading. I found myself talking about things I hadn't thought about in years. A pottery class I had taken at the community center 15 years ago. An herb garden I used to tend in the backyard of the house I shared with Robert. My old plans to someday learn French. You sound like someone who's been asleep for a very long time, he said as we walked back to the car. Maybe I have been. That week, I called the lawyer to check on the offer for my land. The construction company was willing to pay $280,000, with the possibility of closing the deal in 30 days if I agreed. $280,000. After paying taxes and legal fees, I'd have roughly $220,000. Enough to buy a small house in a decent neighborhood, enough to never have to depend on anyone ever again. Jonathan and I started seeing each other regularly. They weren't exactly dates. It was more like we were rediscovering each other. We went to museums, to free concerts in the park, to little restaurants he knew about. He paid for everything without making a big show of it, just treating it like the most natural thing in the world. One afternoon, while we were drinking coffee on a terrace overlooking the city, Jonathan asked me a question that caught me completely off guard. "Claire, have you ever been happy in your adult life?" "Of course I have," I replied automatically. "When Valerie was born." "When else?" "I'm not talking about happy moments," he interrupted gently. "I'm talking about happiness. That feeling of being exactly where you belong, of being who you truly are." I couldn't answer right away. When I finally spoke, my voice came out softer than I expected. "I don't know if I've ever asked myself that question." "I hadn't asked myself that either until a few years ago," he admitted. "After the divorce, when I found myself alone in that big house, I realized I had been living the life everyone else expected me to live, not the one I wanted to live." "And now, are you happy?" "I'm getting closer now," he said it. And something in the way he looked at me made me think that maybe I was part of that equation. It was during the 4th week of our reconnection when everything changed. Jonathan had come to pick me up to go to an art exhibit at the cultural center, but when he arrived, he seemed more excited than usual. "I have a proposal for you," he told me before we could even walk out the door. "There's a house for sale in my neighborhood. It's small, perfect for one person, with a beautiful garden and a room that would make a perfect studio. The price is well within what your land is going to get you." "Jonathan, I can't. Just come see it with me. You don't have to decide anything. Just look at it." The house was absolutely perfect. 2 bedrooms, a bath and a half, a small but modern kitchen, and that extra room with massive windows looking out over the backyard. I could picture myself living there. I could picture myself being happy there. "What do you think?" Jonathan asked while we stood in the living room. "I think it's too good to be true," I admitted. "Why?" "Because good things don't happen to me." Jonathan stepped closer and took my hands. "Claire, look at me. Good things happen to you because you deserve them. You've spent so much time believing you're worth nothing that you've forgotten your own value." That night, after Jonathan dropped me off at home, I sat in my little living room and made a decision. I called the lawyer and told him to accept the offer on the land. 2 days later, while I was working at the flower shop, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the second I answered, I knew the voice immediately. "Mom, we need to talk, urgently." Valerie's voice sounded tight, almost frantic. "What's wrong? Is everything okay?" "I just drove past your house and I saw a Porsche parked out front. A very expensive silver Porsche. Whose is it?" My heart started beating faster. "It's a friend's." "What friend, Mom? You don't know anyone who drives a car like that. What is going on?" "Valerie, I don't understand why." "I've been calling you 53 times since yesterday," she cut me off. 53 times, Mom, and you haven't returned a single call. Where have you been? What is going on?" For the very first time in 5 years, I didn't answer my daughter immediately. For the first time in my adult life, I felt zero need to explain my actions to someone who clearly didn't respect me. "Valerie," I said with a voice I barely recognized as my own, "I think it's time we had a very serious conversation." Valerie arrived at my house exactly 30 minutes after our phone call. She didn't knock. She used the emergency key I had given her years ago and walked in like she owned the place. I found her standing in the middle of my small living room, looking around as if she were seeing the place for the very first time. "Mom, what the hell is going on here?" Her voice had a tone I hadn't heard before. It wasn't condescending like usual. It was nervous. "Hello, Valerie. Good to see you too," I said, sitting down in my favorite armchair without inviting her to take a seat. She remained standing, clearly agitated. "Don't play games with me. That car parked out front is worth over $100,000. Whose is it?" "I told you it belongs to a friend." "What friend, Mom? You don't have friends with that kind of money. You don't have friends at all." The sentence slipped out of her mouth before she could stop it, and for a fraction of a second I saw a flash of something in her eyes that might have been regret. "You're right," I said calmly. "I didn't have friends. But things have changed." Valerie started pacing back and forth, a nervous habit she'd had since she was a little girl. "Mom, I need you to tell me exactly what is going on. I've been digging around, and that car is registered to a Jonathan Miller." "Who is Jonathan Miller?" The absolute coldness with which she said his name bothered me more than I expected. "Digging around. You ran the license plate of my friend's car." "Of course I did. Did you expect me not to worry when my mother, who can't even afford her own car, suddenly has men showing up in Porsches?" Her cheeks were flushed red with frustration. "Jonathan Miller, 64 years old, retired civil engineer, divorced, no dependent children, estimated annual income of $200,000 from pensions and investments." I just stared at her, stunned by the depth of her investigation. "Valerie, did you hire a private detective?" "I didn't need to. Michael has contacts. It wasn't hard to pull basic information." She stopped dead in front of me, crossing her arms. "The question is, what does he want from you?" "I'm sorry, Mom, but be realistic. You're a 62-year-old woman with no money, no career, no property. What could a rich man possibly want from you except—" She stopped, but I knew exactly what she was going to say. "Except what, Valerie?" "Except to take advantage of my desperation." The words hit like a physical blow. "Mom, these men look for vulnerable women, women who will feel grateful for any scrap of attention. They'll use you, and then they'll leave you worse off than you were before." Something inside me snapped right then and there. Not out of pain, but out of rage. A clean, bright rage that had been building up for weeks. "Valerie," I said, standing up slowly. "Sit down." "I don't want to sit down. I want you to explain to me." "Sit down." I repeated it with a voice that made her instantly stop pacing and look at me in shock. She sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa. "I am going to tell you a few things, and you are going to listen to me without interrupting." I walked over to the window, turning my back to her. "First, Jonathan isn't using me. He's reminding me of who I am." "Mom." "Without interrupting," I said firmly. "Second, you're right about one thing. I didn't have friends. Do you know why? Because for 28 years of marriage, your father convinced me I wasn't interesting enough to have friends. He convinced me that my job didn't matter, that my opinions were worthless, that my only purpose was to keep the house clean and raise his daughter." I turned around to face her. Valerie had gone pale. "And after the divorce," I continued, "when I thought I finally had the chance to figure out who I really was, my own daughter told me I was a miserable woman with no future." "I didn't—" "Yes, you did. You said it at the restaurant 3 weeks ago. You told me it was embarrassing to live the way I live. You compared me to Elaine, your dad's new wife, and you found me completely inferior." My voice stayed remarkably calm, but every single word was loaded with years of bottled-up pain. Tears started pooling in Valerie's eyes. "Mom, I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to what? Hurt me? Humiliate me? Make me feel like I was nothing but a burden to my own family?" I walked over to my desk and pulled out the lawyer's letter. "Here is the third thing you're going to find out today, Valerie. I am not the penniless woman you think I am." I handed her the letter. I watched her eyes dart quickly across the text. I saw the exact moment she hit the figure of $280,000. Her face cycled through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a calculating look that broke my heart to see. "You have a plot of land," she muttered. "I had a plot of land. I sold it a week ago. The money will be wired into my account next Friday." Valerie looked up at me as if I were a complete stranger. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Why should I have told you? So you could tell me exactly how to spend it. So you could suggest I invest it responsibly under your strict supervision." I sat down right across from her. "Valerie, for 5 years you have tried to convince me that I have no worth. You've talked about me with my own sister as if I were some pathetic woman who can't take care of herself. You've used my financial situation as hard evidence of my personal failure. I was worried about you, she said weakly. No, you weren't worried. You were ashamed. Ashamed of having a mother who didn't meet your high standards of success? I leaned forward. Do you know what Jonathan said to me the very first time we talked on the phone? He asked me if I was happy. Not if I had money, not if I was successful, not if I lived in the right zip code. He asked me if I was happy. Valerie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Mom, I know I've made mistakes. They aren't mistakes, Valerie, they're choices. You chose to view me as an embarrassment. You chose to treat me like I was lesser than you. You chose to believe that my value as a human being depended entirely on my bank account. The silence stretched out heavy between us. Finally, Valerie spoke in a voice I could barely hear. What's going to happen now? Now I'm going to live my life, I said simply. I'm going to buy a new house. I'm going to spend time with someone who sees me as a complete person, not as a charity project. I am going to be happy. As for us, that depends entirely on you. I stood up and walked toward the door. If you can learn to respect me, if you can stop treating me like I'm your burden to carry, then maybe we can build a real relationship. But if you come over here expecting to find the same woman who sat quietly while you insulted her, you are in for a massive surprise. Valerie stood up slowly, almost like she was in a trance. Mom, I need time to process all this. Take all the time you need. I opened the door. But Valerie, the next time you come to my house, you knock on the door first. And the next time you speak to me, you do it with respect. I watched her walk to her car. Her shoulders slumped in a way I hadn't seen since she was a little girl who had just been scolded. A part of me wanted to run after her, apologize, go right back to being the accommodating mother I had always been. But instead, I closed the door and stood in my small living room, feeling something I hadn't felt in decades. I felt powerful. That night, when Jonathan called to ask how my day went, I told him everything about the confrontation with Valerie, about selling the land, about finally saying all the things I had kept locked inside for years. How do you feel? He asked me. Free, I said. And for the first time in my adult life, I truly meant it. 6 months after that showdown with Valerie, I was standing in the kitchen of my new house brewing coffee for two. Through the window, I could see my garden, where I'd planted roses, fragrant herbs, and a small vegetable patch. Jonathan was out on the patio reading the morning paper at the wrought iron table we had picked out together last month. The house was exactly what I needed. Small, but flooded with natural light, with enough space for me and the projects I'd never had the courage to try before. The extra room Jonathan had pointed out was now my design studio, where I'd started taking online classes and working on small projects for acquaintances. My phone buzzed just as I was pouring the coffee. It was Valerie. We had spoken exactly 3 times in the last 6 months, short, awkward, but strictly respectful conversations. She was actively learning how to talk to me differently, and I was actively learning how to hold my boundaries. Hi, Mom, she said when I answered. Her voice sounded different, much softer. Hi, honey, how are you? I'm good. I wanted to ask you something. There was a brief pause. Would you be free for lunch next week? There are some things I'd really like to talk to you about. Of course. What day works for you? Tuesday. And Mom, I'd really like to meet Jonathan, if you're open to it. Sure. My heart did a little jump. I'd love for you to meet him. After hanging up, I walked out to the patio. Jonathan looked up from his newspaper and smiled at me. That specific smile I had grown to love so much, not just because it was directed at me, but because it represented everything I had discovered about myself in these last few months. That was Valerie, I told him, sitting down next to him. She wants to meet you. How do you feel about that? Nervous, hopeful, cautious. I leaned back in my chair, letting the morning sun warm my face. But I'm not afraid of her anymore. Jonathan nodded. Over these months, he had come to know the entire history of my relationship with my daughter, and he had been one of the most healing parts of my journey. He never once told me I should just forgive and forget. He never minimized the damage Valerie's words had done to me. He had simply been there, a steady presence while I processed years of hurt, and finally found my own voice. "Do you remember what you told me the very first time you asked if I was happy?" I asked him. "You said you didn't know if you had ever even asked yourself that question." "Yeah, well, I know the answer now." I looked at him, feeling a profound sense of peace. "I am happy, Jonathan. For the first time in my adult life, I am genuinely happy." He reached across the table and took my hand. "And I'm happy with you." My relationship with Jonathan had evolved entirely naturally. There had been no pressure, zero unrealistic expectations. It was simply two grown adults who had found something in each other they didn't even realize they were looking for. He saw me as a complete person, a woman with interesting thoughts, a valuable perspective, and dreams that absolutely deserved to be chased. A week later, I found myself walking into the exact same restaurant where Valerie had humiliated me months before. But this time was entirely different. This time, I pulled up in Jonathan's Porsche, which he had been teaching me how to drive. This time, I was wearing a brand new dress I had bought without once checking the price tag. This time, I didn't walk in like a woman apologizing for taking up space. Valerie was already there when I walked in, but she looked different too. Less arrogant, less fiercely sure of herself. When she saw us approaching the table, she stood up nervously. "Mom," she said. And for the first time in years, she pulled me into a genuine hug. "You look radiant." "Thank you, honey." I turned toward Jonathan. "I want to introduce you to Jonathan Miller. Jonathan, this is my daughter, Valerie." Jonathan extended his hand with a warm smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Valerie. Your mother talks about you all the time." We sat down, and for the first few minutes, the conversation was definitely cautious. But gradually, as Jonathan shared stories about his work and asked genuine, interested questions about Valerie's career, the heavy tension began to lift. "Jonathan," Valerie said eventually, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What do you see in my mother?" The question came out directly, without a trace of malice, just pure, genuine curiosity. Jonathan looked over at me with that gaze that always made me feel like I was the only person left in the world. "I see a woman who has been through hell, but never lost her capacity to love. I see someone who is infinitely stronger than she believes, far more interesting than people have led her to think, and vastly more valuable than she was ever told." He took a breath. "I see Claire, not as a shadow of other people, but exactly as she truly is." Valerie's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, I never saw you like that." "I know," I said softly, "but now you can learn how." "I've been talking to a therapist," Valerie confessed suddenly. "After our fight 6 months ago, I realized there were some ugly things about myself I really needed to look at." She dabbed her eyes with a napkin. "I realized that treating you the way I did had a lot more to do with me than it ever did with you." "What do you mean?" "I was terrified of ending up like you." The words slipped out in a fragile whisper. "I was terrified that if I didn't distance myself from your life, if I didn't look at you as a failure, I might end up, well, exactly how I thought you had ended up, abandoned and totally worthless." Valerie nodded, completely unable to speak. "My sweet girl," I said, reaching my hand across the table to grab hers. "I was never abandoned, and I was never worthless. I was just lost. And sometimes you really have to get lost to finally find yourself." Lunch lasted 3 solid hours. We talked about the past, but much more importantly, we talked about the future. Valerie opened up about cracks in her marriage she had never mentioned before, about the crushing pressure at her job, about the heavy fears she'd been carrying around. I told her all about my plans to expand my little interior design business, about the trips Jonathan and I were sketching out, about the sheer thrill of waking up every morning, actually excited for what the day might bring. "Mom," Valerie said as we were finally getting ready to leave, "do you think we could try this again, like as a real mother and daughter this time?" "I would love nothing more," I told her. "But under one condition." "What's that?" "That you see me as Claire, not just as your mother. I am a complete person with a life of my own and my own choices to make. You are allowed to disagree with me. You are allowed to worry about me, but you have to respect me." "Deal," she said. And this time when we hugged goodbye, it felt like I was actually holding my daughter for the very first time in years. That night, as Jonathan and I strolled through our neighborhood after dinner, I thought about just how drastically everything had shifted. You know what the strangest part of all this is? I asked him, pausing in front of a house with an especially stunning garden. What? For years, I honestly believed my life was over the day Robert walked out. I thought my best years were miles behind me, and all I had left was to quietly exist until I died. I looked up at the stars, just starting to pierce through the night sky. But it turns out my real life hadn't even started yet. And now I actually have plans. I have dreams. I have a relationship with my daughter built on mutual respect. I have a man who loves me exactly for who I am. I looked at him and smiled. And for the first time in 62 years, I finally have myself. Jonathan kissed me right there under the glow of a streetlight. And for a split second, I felt like I was 20 years old again, but not because I wanted to turn back the clock. I felt young because I had finally found the absolute freedom to be the woman I was always meant to be. As we walked the rest of the way home, fingers laced together, I thought about the woman I was just one short year ago. The woman who swallowed her pride and stayed quiet while her own daughter insulted her to her face. The woman who firmly believed she wasn't worthy of love or respect. The woman who was dead certain her story had already been written. That version of me had to completely disappear so the real Claire could finally be born. And for the very first time in my life, I wasn't going to apologize for taking up space in this world.